reward who are in paradise, I'm sure. And there are a lot of souls who, once they do go on to their reward, they'll be in paradise and subsequently heaven. And there's a few groups of people amongst which you can count yourself that can take credit for that. Because if it weren't for you, I wouldn't have been in the position that I was in. I want to talk to you today about the interesting sermon in the book of Acts. Paul had his Mars Hill discourse. Acts 17 is where we find it. This is actually half of a two-part series. This is part number 1, but you're not going to get part 2 for the worship hour. We're actually going to talk about sowing and reaping. But if you're here this morning, well, you are here this morning. If you're here this morning and also have ever run into somebody that just has a vehement denial of the existence of God, maybe this sermon will help you have an extra arrow or two in your quiver to be able to at least discuss it with people or open the door for further discussion. You could learn every bit of this material in its completeness and probably not really have any better chance of convincing an atheist than if you didn't know it. But what you'd be able to do is A, guard your own heart, and B, you would be able to prolong the conversation with an atheist or an agnostic long enough to develop a relationship. Now, once you develop the relationship, then you can really have a good chance of convincing that person of the existence of an all-powerful, almighty being, and the identity of that being as Almighty God, Jehovah God, the Judeo-Christian God. Let's go to Acts chapter 17 and let's read a little bit. I'm just going to start walking this down. I wrote an article about this when I first started putting articles out on Substack. And as such, the article is not really well organized, but every bit of the material is there, and it's probably better presented than I would present it here. And that's having to do with some of my own shortcomings about organized thought and disseminating that information. But as we go to Acts chapter 17, we start in verse 22. Then Paul stood in the midst of Mars Hill and said, "You men of Athens, I perceive that in all things you're too..." Now the King James says superstitious. I used to teach this part of this lesson this way. I love my King James. It's my beloved King James. I like those weird verbs. I like those sentence constructs. But I would say the word superstitious might be a little outdated. Really and truly, it should be translated religious. And I would make the point how that Paul started, the way we would say it back home, on the same side of the ditch as the Athenians. In other words, you've got to find common ground. Well, that's true, but I think I was wrong. I've really studied this word that the Greek word, the English word superstitious, the Greek word that it translates, and I think my beloved King James got it right. You see, the Athenians were superstitious. They had a god for everything. They had a river god, an ocean god, a sea god, a mountain god, a grass god, everything. And they were afraid if anything happened. You know, we talk about this tragedy that happened just, 2 nights ago now. Barry and I did an impromptu live stream about when tragedy strikes. Incidentally, you know he was going to title that thing, that impromptu live stream, When Tragedy Strikes with Tony Brewer? I'm glad he changed. Yes, now you got it. It set in, didn't it? See, that's what happened with us. He laughed about it, says, "I don't think I need to title it like that." Well, when you look at these tornadoes that come through, humans try to ascribe higher meaning. Because we have to, we're going to talk about that from Blaise Pascal. There's a God-sized hole in the chest of every individual, and they try to fill it up with all manner of silliness and worldly stuff. It cannot be filled. God has to fill it. But the idea is we look for meaning. I think that's why there's a lot of error about the Holy Spirit being taught, is because it's hard for us to conceptualize that God was smart enough in the long ago when He said, "Let there be light." He knew you and I were going to be here today, and He was able to build into the coding of the cosmos provision for His people. And from our perspective, that looks supernatural and miraculous, but it is not. And I think that's much more powerful than a silly old miracle. A miracle is kind of a cheat code if you think about it. If I could do a miracle, I could slap this pew and grow probably an oak tree, I think. This is oak. Anyway, I could grow an oak tree. Now that would be miraculous. But what would be more impressive is if I designed the entire cosmos that at this time in this place, when we're here, multiplied thousands of years later, that this oak tree is just here for us to enjoy. And we wouldn't even have known to pray for it and its benefits. You see, God would have given it before we even asked. And I really think that's much more powerful than a miracle. So Paul is saying, you're too superstitious. You have all of these gods, and because you're so afraid. If you could just trust in this one God, you wouldn't have to be superstitious. There would be no fear associated with your life in a very real sense. So he says, "For as I passed by and beheld your devotions, I found an altar with this inscription, to the unknown God. Whom therefore ye ignorantly worship, him declare I unto you." Oh. And then Paul elucidates 6 logical arguments for the existence of God. Eons, in some cases, before they were formally identified by academia and the wisdom of man. Nobody was running around talking about the cosmological argument for the existence of God. Now listen, in order to teach this lesson, I got to use some big words. I think it's rather silly. And it's hard for me to use these big words without putting a little bit of an absurd tone in my voice. Like I don't know. I feel kind of pompous. It's the cosmological. See, I can't even do it normally. The cosmological argument for the existence of God. Folks, that's just the argument from design. That's all it is. That's all it is. So what I'll do is I'll use like a $5 word, and then I'll give you an explanation for it. And I don't expect you to remember these words, but maybe if I cast it in a light of absurdity, at least the concept will cement into our minds. I found that I learned pretty well like that. You know, you kind of make it funny a little bit and kind of make it absurd, a really hard and abstract idea, and at least the principle sticks into my brain pan. And I figure if I'm a human being and that helps me, maybe that'll help other people. So let's talk about this first logical argument for the existence of God. Barry, we're in a very dangerous situation. There is no clock. Where is it? Oh. What time do I go till? Barry, would you raise your hand or something, get my attention when I've got 5 minutes? Thank you. These people will love you for it. Well, the cosmological argument for the existence of God is basically just, and I said the argument from design. I misspoke. The teleological argument is the argument of design. But the cosmological argument is the idea that there has to be a prime mover. Have you ever understood this question about the chicken and the egg? Have you ever really thought about it? I hadn't for a long time, and I just thought, well, that's silly. Which came first, chicken or the egg? You got to have the chicken first because the chicken produces an egg. And that's right. I can prove that really with Scripture. But what's the entailment of that? Well, there had to be a very first chicken, did it not? Where did the first chicken come from? It could not have come from an egg. because there was no chicken to produce an egg. Something cannot produce itself. That is a logical absurdity. For instance, a causal chain, a chain of cause and effect. The very first chicken is a cause, and then it lays, well, a boy chicken and a girl chicken fall in love and they have eggs, and now you have more chickens. You understand what I mean? So you have this causal effect, this cause effect, cause effect, cause effect. In this causal chain, after the prime or the uncaused first cause, every specimen in the causal chain, every link, not only is it a cause, but it's also an effect. For instance, the egg that you're holding in your hand that you're about to put in the incubator, that is an effect of the chicken that produced it. But that egg also causes another chicken. So you have this causal chain, and it's daisy-chained from the very, very first chicken all the way to the very, very last chicken. And that's a complete unit. Now that's very myopic, and it's a very, very deep level of analysis. But if we back out broad spectrum, the shorter our causal chain gets and the bigger the links get until we back out to a cosmic level. The universe is a causal chain. All right? The universe is a cause and an effect, but it cannot cause itself. It can affect us, but here's the thing. That which caused the universe has to be a prime mover, an uncaused first cause. That's the cause. The universe is the effect. The causal chain ends there. That's it. That is the shortest causal chain that we can conceive of. Interestingly enough, science says that the uncaused first cause is a cosmic anomaly that violates the known laws of the universe. Has Barry taught any at all about miracles? That's a miracle, folks. The atheists believe that you and I are here because of a miracle, an uncaused first cause. That chicken, what do we know about the seed? Seed produces after its own kind. You are never going to breed two dogs together, and when you come home and there's 4 pups that have been whelped, there's 3 canine pups and 1 lizard. It's an absurdity. So that chicken had to come from somewhere, and it couldn't have come from some other species or some other kind of animal. That's a much better way of putting that. So it had to be an uncaused first cause. God made the chicken. That's the easiest explanation for Christians. The scientists say that the chicken came about because of an anomaly that superseded nature. That's a miracle. Any way you cut it. They just don't label it like we do. So here we have the cosmological argument for the existence of God. Listen to it. God that made the world and all things therein, seeing that He is Lord of heaven and earth, dwelleth not in temples made with hands. You see, let's leave the chicken and the egg, and let's go to God. Let's go to the uncaused first cause. I was watching a show by Ben Stein where he was interviewing all of these people at Berkeley, California, the university. And these people were making all kinds of absurd claims, and all he would ask is, well, what about this? And he finally got this scientist, this professor, well, what caused that? And he got him down to, well, obviously, and the professor said that, the germ of life piggybacked off crystals from somewhere else. And that's how we have our universe, and that's how we have life. And Ben Stein, what did he do? He said, well, where'd that come from? That's for the cosmological argument, if the atheist says that we are here by chance and nature produced us and all of this, that's fine. Where'd we come from? Okay, we were produced by that. Where'd that come from? Okay, now you're down to the Big Bang. That's great. So there was a molecular singularity in which all the coding of the cosmos was contained, and there had to be a force so powerful enough to bust that apart and get it spinning and going. Where'd that force come from? That fails. They have to explain the uncaused first cause. Christianity has an explanation for it. Science does not. We say it's God. Because you see, God cannot be contained in this world. God has to be outside of this system in order to create this system. Because it's a logical absurdity to say the system created itself. In fact, this system in which we live, the universe, there is not contained enough energy within this own system that this system can even destroy itself. There is not one molecule, one atom, one proton or neutron from which you can harvest enough energy in the universe that you can annihilate, that you can destroy. Every piece of matter that ever existed on the earth exists on the earth now. There is no more matter or no less matter in the earth, that's too narrow. There is no more matter or no less matter in the universe than there ever has been. Because the universe is a contained system. So that's the cosmological argument for the existence of God. What made the universe? The universe couldn't make itself. The universe couldn't cause itself, so it has to have an uncaused first cause, a prime mover. I've spent way too much time on that. Let's go to the next argument for the existence of God. Verse 25, neither is he worshipped with men's hands as though he needs anything, seeing he giveth to all life and breath and all things. This argument is a little bit more abstract. This is called the ontological argument for the existence of God. And if you use that word very often, you'll sound really smart. I don't know if you will be, but you'll sound it. I know I'm not really smart, but I sound it. The ontological argument for the existence of God deals with being. Sometimes whenever I'm having a debate with somebody and we're talking about practice, they are really arguing ontology. And I say, wait, we are talking about practice in the world, but you're talking about identity. Forget practice, we're just talking about the identity of God. Well, God's not worshipped with men's hands as though he needed anything. You can go back to the book of Isaiah, especially Isaiah. From Isaiah 40 and onward, God deals with idolatry. Y'all, the only way that I can think to explain this is God makes fun. God ridicules the idea of idolatry to the point where both in Isaiah and I believe Jeremiah, there's an exchange with the prophet and God saying, you need to tell the children of Israel how stupid they are. The word stupid is not used, and I know that kind of makes us feel a certain way, but that's the thrust. Think about the foolishness of going to the forge and forging an axe and putting a handle from a tree on that axe, and then taking that axe and chopping down a tree, felling the tree, building a fire, cooking food, carving an image, and offering the food and the fire to the image you carved. That is the height of foolishness. You see, God doesn't need for you to do that in order for you to worship him. In fact, we really see this with we see this with David. And he gets this idea that he's going to build God's house. And he goes to the prophet of God. And he says, I'm going to build God's house. Look at me. I've got a sealed house with a roof and hard walls, and it's permanent. It's a good structure. We need God's house to be that way. And the prophet of God says, great. There's just one problem. He didn't go read his Bible. He didn't go talk to God. I did that on purpose. Well, the prophet had to eat a little bit of crow, as we call it, and he come back and said, David, we got some issues. God said that you're a man with bloody hands. He's not going to let you build his house, for one. But two, you don't build houses for God. God builds houses for you. God doesn't need anything from us. That's a very interesting exchange. All of the gods that human beings worship that is not Jehovah God are petty, they're immoral, they are impotent, they're really just humans. That's all they are. Think about the pantheon of the Roman gods and the Greek gods. Talk about Zeus. It makes really, really good movies. I remember whenever Lou Ferrigno back in the day played several movies where he played Hercules. I watched those as much as I could. My mama didn't like them because, he was killing the monsters and stuff that's a little too violent for her taste. But my daddy would sneak and let me watch some of them a little bit. Well, the reason you have Hercules is because Zeus is a philanderer. All of the gods were. They're not anybody you want to be like. You see, the ontological argument that Paul makes here is that God is so powerful, if anything human beings can conceive of, if they could conceive of something more powerful than God, then that would be God. Now, that's a little bit of a difficult thing to wrap our minds around. But Jehovah God is superior to anything that human beings could come up with. Human beings can't come up with the idea of Jehovah God. We have to be taught about Jehovah God in order to understand Him. But whenever we leave human beings to their own devices, they come up with Zoroastrianism. They come up with worshiping the sun. They come up with worshiping nature. And all of that falls short. So Paul tips his hat. All of these silly devotions that you have, they fall short because they're not worshiping the God. I had a conversation. I play this silly little game called Elden Ring. It's a game that's kind of hard to play. I'm 47 years old and I don't have the reflexes to play it anymore, but these guys that I play with, or some of them are some old heads, and then like me, and then we got some kids. Well, we got to talking. All these kids, they claim to be Norse practitioners. I'm like, you mean you follow Odin and them? They said, yeah. I said, well, I thought Ragnarok had already happened. And Jormungandr had already defeated Thor, and Odin is dead. I'm like, who are you following? Why would you not follow Jehovah God? Do some research on this idea called henotheism. Henotheism is, and this was practiced in the first century, Corinth had a henotheistic understanding of the universe. All of these gods, then these pantheons, they thought were real. But they thought Jehovah God was superior, so they served Him. That's why they couldn't go eat meat offered to idols. Because to them, those idols were real. Where you and I we could go eat that meat because we know how silly it is. So I explained to them what henotheism is. And I said, even your own secular history and your own mythos has where once Jormungandr destroys Thor, he eats the world, and we have a recreation, and that really is a segue into the Adam and Eve story, which the reason that came about was so that the Norse practitioners could have a reason for the people to convert to Christianity, and they built it into the mythos. Wow, that's crazy. Let me tell you where we are with those studies. I've got 3 guys that I'm studying with, and every one of them say, well, that's stupid to follow Balder. Balder is not even alive anymore. He was killed. I said, yes. Well, why wouldn't we follow Jehovah God? That's what I was asking you. So they're all 3 saying, well, we want to follow Jehovah God. Now we want to figure out how to do that. I said, well, now you need that book. And when I come back and I get to playing the game, I play with them every Friday. We play for 2 or 3 hours. And listen, I'm kind of tired of that silly game, but I want to keep talking to them boys. And I'm going to be making a trip to Scotland very soon to study with this one some more. But I wouldn't have been able to have that conversation unless I understood about the ontological argument for the existence of God. Now, the ontological argument for the existence of God was not elucidated until, I think, 500 to 800 years later. But here it is, right here in Scripture. Now, let's go to verse 26. And hath made of one blood all nations of men for to dwell on all the face of the earth, and hath determined the times before appointed and the bounds of their habitation. That is the argument of design. That's the Greek word for design or perfection is teleos. The teleological argument, the argument of design. If you and I were walking down the beach and I stubbed my toe and it was a MacBook, and I said, wow, look, all of this sand and silica and all that kind of was blown together by the wind, and here's a MacBook. You would give me a checkup from the neck up. It just wouldn't be right. And again, that's a little absurd. And no true atheist or agnostic that doesn't believe in God would ever make that argument. But that argument is taken out to its farthest extent to show the absurdity of it. How in the world do we think that we got all of this design from accident? There's this young man. I've never met a certified math genius. Now, that's not a formal title. That's something I made up. But this dude is smart. And he's a mathematician. This guy got his undergrad degree and is like math theory. I don't even know what that means, y'all. I just know he's smart. And he explained what it meant to have a 0.00000000125 chance of something. And because your atheist will say, yes, the fact that we're being here today, and I'm making this number up for a point. Whatever number I say, it's not as spectacular as the real number. So the atheist will say, well, there's a 0.000000, and they'll carry it out so far in like 1.25 or 125%. And Dakota says, mathematicians understand that that's zero. That is zero. It's a 0%. It's an impossibility. 5 minutes? Awesome. So there's a 0% possibility that we evolved. Don't let anybody fool you with those chances. Now, the teleological argument for the existence of God is the argument from design. And because we can see the design, we must conclude that there was a designer. And if the design shows intelligence, there could not be no intelligence in the design unless there was an intelligent designer. All right, number next, verse 27. We're downshifting and I got the skinny pedal mashed. Verse 27, here's the purpose, that they should seek the Lord if haply they might feel after him and find him, though he be not far from every one of us. This is the religious argument. This is the Blaise Pascal, the God-shaped hole in the size in the chest of every man. Every man, a human being, throughout all of creation, has sought for a higher good. Jordan Peterson conceptualizes it like this: orient yourself towards the highest possible good of which you can conceive and live towards that. Even the preacher in Ecclesiastes, he understood as he's working through this, he gets to a point where the first time he talks about living and doing for somebody besides himself, it's the wife of your youth. So you would even have a better life if you were an atheist, if you could live for something higher than yourself, some higher ideal, and that ideal would just be to have a good marriage. Your life would be better. We want to live a transcendent life on this earth, and you will only transcend to the level of your ideals. So your ideal should be the highest ideal, and that's Jehovah God. So that's the religious argument. And we can go all through history, and every culture, every demographic has sought the higher good. They have sought the spiritual realm. That has to be built into us. Number next is the moral argument, verse 28. In World War II, the Nuremberg trials were held, and the Germans said that you have no right to hold us accountable for what we did because we were a sovereign nation following our sovereign laws. And collectively the world said, there's a higher ordered law to which everybody must yield and submit, and you violated that law. And that's God's law. Morality is objective. If morality is not objective, then there is no reason ever to jail a pedophile. You cannot condemn a pedophile if morality is subjective. How would you condemn him? Because I can take you to many cultures and many religious organizations that justify pedophilia. The Islamic religions are one of them. The Islamic religions are one of them. Why are we right and they're wrong if morality is subjective? There's no way. It's just personal preference at that point. So that's how you know that there is a God, is because there is a standard of morality. All right? Number next is the aesthetic argument. So I'm going to read the verse. For in him we live and move and have our being. That's your moral argument. As certain of your own poets have said, for we also are his offspring. Barry printed this off for me because I couldn't get it to work. Here, let me read the ascetic argument. Paul concludes by admonishing the Athenians, saying, for as much then as we are the offspring of God, we ought not to think of the Godhead as likened to gold or silver or stone, graven by art and man's device. Here Paul introduces the idea that can be associated with the aesthetic argument for the existence of God. This argument posits that human appreciation for beauty, art, and aesthetic value points to a creator who endowed humans with these sensibilities. No other animal, and we are animals in the fact that we're not plants. Understand, I'm not trying to take away your humanity or your soul, but just for the argument, we are animals in that we're not plants. No other animal in the world has an existential understanding. No other animal in the world tries to leave a legacy for its offspring. No other animal in the world can appreciate art and beauty. And what we try to do, we can see beauty and art in the creation, and we try to recreate that by ourselves, or with ourselves, with our own beauty and art through music or painting or poetry. That is supernatural, folks. That's divine. And the fact that humans have the capability and monkeys don't, it's an argument for the existence of God. All right? And that's it. That we've got through the argument. How many minutes do I have? Well, then I'm going to leave the conclusion to you all. You all draw the conclusion that you need from this. If you're on the Substack, go and search just Ancient Wisdom, Modern Insight. And so much of this is expanded. Remember, if you can memorize the arguments, you're not going to win against an atheist every single time. You're more so going to bolster your heart and protect it